Okay, this is lecture 8, and we're talking about what are called arrays. So they call it a complex data type. It just means like an array is just a list of things. So if you want to, normally we just store like one thing in X, right? We have like X equals 5 or something like that. But now we're going to say if X is, so that's like when X is an integer or something like that. Now if we say X is an array, it can store like a bunch of numbers, like a list, like 3, 8, 10, 12, 15, or a list of names, maybe like Tom and Paul and Peter and John. Okay, it could just be, so it's a list. So it's a little bit more powerful in that sense. And of course it's a little bit more complex than just a single value. So we call it a complex data type. But it's basically, an array is just a list. So in this lecture we'll begin discussing VB complex data types, in which we combine several primitive data types. So primitive just means like integer or string or double or decimal, whatever, all the data types that we've studied, but those are just the basic ones. He calls them the primitive ones. But now we're going to be able to combine several of them together in a list or an array. So we're going to create a more complex data structure to manage multiple pieces of data together as a list. Okay, and VB supports many so-called list types, and we're going to look at something called arrays. Okay, arrays. There are other types as well. They just have slight differences, but basically they're all just ways to handle a list of items. VB arrays in which we construct and use an indexed array of elements. So all that means is that we can talk about the first element in the array and the second element and the third element and the fourth element. So those are called indexes. First, second, third, and fourth. Okay, all must be of the same type. So that's one thing about these arrays, is that we can't have numbers and strings together in the same array. So they all have to be either numbers, or in other words all integers, or all strings, or all doubles, or whatever, but they all have to be the same. And we'll use an index, an integer, to keep track of the elements. So the first element, the second element, and so on. Let's see if we can get an example of this so it doesn't seem so strange. So we might have an array called friends, and we might put our friends' names in there. So we can start out with just 2 of our friends, but that's better than just a single variable. I mean, it's more complex, I guess, than just a single variable where we could only put one friend's name. So we might only could put Fred in, but here, because it's an array, we can, or a list, we can put Fred and Wilma and then other people as well. Now, one weird thing about this is that we start counting at 0, and I think we've seen this in other places. But anyway, we start counting at 0. So we don't call this the first element. We call it the 0th element, which is kind of weird. But for some reason, some historical reason, someone decided to do it that way. And that's not true of every programming language. But in many programming languages, they do it this way. So the first element is called the 0th element. The second element is called the first element, and so on. So, and if so one way to fill in or define this array is to, first you have to declare it like something like this, and then you can start to fill it in, like fill in the first one with Fred. You do this: friends 0 equals Fred, friends 1 equals Wilma. But first you have to define or declare friends. Okay, and you'll declare an array like this. So you'd say the array name, in this case he's calling it friends, so you'd say dim friends, then you'd have to put open bracket, close bracket, and then you have to put the size of the array as well. So here, this array is of size 3. Now again, it's kind of weird because actually it's of size 4. right? It has 4 spaces, it can hold 4 different values in our list, but we call it size. Actually, we call it the size is 4, but we put 3 in here. I'm sorry, the size is 4, but we put 3 in here. Okay, so it's a little bit odd that we put 3 in here, but that's just the way it's done. Okay, so we'd say dim friends 3. We're going to have 4 spaces. This is going to be called the 3rd space, but it's really the 4th, or it's going to have index 3 anyway. And then after we do this, then we can start to fill in the spaces or fill in our list by doing what's going to go in the first space, which is actually 0, what's going to go in the second space, which is actually 1 here, and so on. Okay? It says in general, we'd say friends I equals the particular value that we want to fill in.